Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy Small Charities Week. Thank you all for joining. We're going to get started pretty quickly because we like to, jam pack as much as we can to these sessions. But yeah, thank you all for coming. We have a question and answers box that you could put questions in throughout, and if I can, I'll answer some as I go along. But if not, I'm going to try and leave quite a big amount of time at the end to just answer any questions, because I know this is a really big topic, and I want you to get as much out of this as possible. Can everybody see the screen okay? If anyone can do me a little thumbs up reaction, that would be good. Yes, great, thank you. Right, yeah, so we're talking today about ethical storytelling, and I want to kind of make sure we frame this within small charities and what's available when you have little to no budget and how you can approach this. But before we start, just want to introduce myself. So my name's Emma Bracegirdle. I'm the founder of the Saltways. We make ethical and effective videos for the third sector, and we also do training as well, so workshops like this. And we also have other training platforms that we provide. And yeah, this picture on the bottom right is actually the first video I ever made on my phone whilst working in a youth homeless charity, which wasn't a big charity. So I've kind of been there, I've done it, I've learned a lot of lessons, and hopefully will save you all a bit of time and energy today by sharing what those have been. So just before we get started, I'm going to show you a really short video about who we are and what we do at the Saltways.
In some documentary filmmaking and in the charity sector, for you to be viewing someone through a lens, which you are practically, but you want the feeling when you're telling ethical storytelling that you're with someone and they're telling you their story, and it's done with respect.
Give people space and time, because those are the two most important things. And I think just treating the story with respect is really important to me.
You want people to care, then you just let someone see the human behind the story.
So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel of who we are, what we do, and why ethical filmmaking is so important to us here. And before, I know this is like the third time I said before we get into it, but this is just something that I wanted to let you all know about is we are hosting a charity film festival on the 24th of September at Rich Mix in London. The entries are open now. There is a whole category just for small charities. It does close on the 30th of September. So if you do want to enter, 30th of June, sorry, for entries. So if you do want to enter, you have to do that pretty sharpish. But yeah, free to enter. There's no voting system. We've got some great judges. And then obviously everyone is invited to come as well to the event. So today, what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be going through what actually is ethical storytelling. A lot of what I'm talking about, it will kind of be within filmmaking, but you can translate it to case studies, animation, anything that you're doing when you're involving people contributing to stories. We're going to talk a bit about trauma-informed practice, consent, some interview techniques, how to support people to capture their own stories in a way that feels ethical, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So what is ethical storytelling? It's a big question, and what do we actually mean by it? So for us at the Saltways, and my personal definition is that it's creating content that puts the interest of contributors, especially those with lived experience, at the centre. So that's not the organisation's comms strategy, it's not the funder's reporting requirements, the person whose story it is. And I know that might sound obvious, but there is a tendency, and I've seen it from working in charities and with charities, and it does exist in filmmaking as well, that to kind of focus on what makes a story useful to us rather than what's right for the person who's telling it. So we're under a lot of pressure, I know, especially with small charities, to hit targets, to make things emotional, to show impact, and sometimes that pressure can work against the people who we're supposed to be serving. So by telling stories ethically, we are actually serving the people that we are working with as well. So that's quite a big definition, but hopefully by the end of this, you'll have an understanding of what that all kind of means. And then there's 4 kind of key principles that I want you to hold kind of in mind just throughout this, and I'm going to go into them all in more detail. But there's co-creation, power dynamics, transparency, and authenticity. So really briefly, co-creation means bringing people in as collaborators, not just subjects. So that makes sure people feel like they're part of the process. The power dynamics means actively recognizing that there is an imbalance between your organization and a contributor, and doing what you can to disrupt that power balance. Transparency means being really honest about everything throughout the process. And I'll go into that in more detail. And authenticity means being willing to let go of control and follow where the story actually leads, which is usually somewhere more interesting than your original plan, which is good. But I'll go into those into more detail. Before I do, I just want to show a film, and I will be showing examples throughout, of a video that we created with an amazing organisation called Agenda Alliance, and it was completely co-created. We were really transparent at the beginning, so we involved a lot of stakeholders at the beginning of the process to get their input about what the messaging should be, how they wanted people to feel, what's the tone of voice, who the best people were to tell their stories in it, who were the best people to speak from the organisation. And they really helped shape everything throughout. We also were very much protective of the contributors, in that we made sure that they knew exactly what we were going to be talking about, and they had a chance to opt out of anything that they weren't comfortable with. They chose where they were going to be filmed, even the time of the day they wanted to be filmed. They got to see all the cuts before they went. They got to see the final cut before it was launched, and they really made sure that they had ownership and control throughout. So I'm just going to show you that as an example, and I'm really happy to answer questions about that as well towards the end. Sorry, just
I've got trauma. I know what I went through my trauma, but nobody's trying to listen. But at least, why not give them or give us a listening ear and put yourself in our shoes that minute to know what we are facing?
I want to be listened to, but nobody's willing to take a chance because I'm in recovery, because I've got that stigma. So I've gone from a stigma of being an addict, being in and out of prison, got all that against me, and now I've got it against me because I'm in recovery, when really people in recovery should be celebrated.
I remember years ago, I was homeless. I slept on the bus. Bus 12 is a 24-hour bus in London. It was so difficult for me in terms of getting support. It's not something I really want to remember. You know, somebody seeing you for the first time and you just said, okay, I think we're running out of time. Okay, so where do we start from? Oh, you don't have an ID, you don't have a status. Okay, let me just ask you this question. Why not just go back to your country? That was what I got. And you know, when I heard that, my head went blank. You don't know if my country is safe. You don't know the reason why I'm here in the first place. You don't know if I'm running from someone. You know nothing about me.
Some of the most common patterns we see in women being failed by public services is this lack of a trauma-informed approach. If you think of like the worst thing that's ever happened to you, or your worst day, and how you've interacted with services on that day, and you're facing that trauma but without support of a family, a partner, without an income, perhaps without somewhere to live, the way you interact with the world is really different. But a lot of public services fail to take this into account.
It was a judge that said, has this woman ever been to rehab? It wasn't anyone else. For 32 years I've been heroin and crack addict. Nobody had ever said to me, have you ever been to rehab? Have you ever thought about rehab? It was a judge, and it took that judge to see something in me that I couldn't even see in myself. I can remember when I went to rehab, I introduced myself and I went, I'm Charlie, I'm a junkie shoplifter from Leeds. And now when I left, I went, I'm Charlie, I'm kind, I'm compassionate, I'm caring, I've got empathy, and I want to help others.
Women are failed by services because essentially services are designed for men and boys. So women are expected to fit into those services, but those services are not designed to meet their needs.
The more you treat a woman as if she is worthwhile, the more she begins to internalise it and believe it. That makes it easier for her to advocate for herself.
The days after I left prison, mostly, the last 3 times especially, I was released homeless. So you end up just going to trap houses, so you end up using, and you're just on that cycle again. You're trying to straighten your life out and sort your life out, and nothing seems to be easy. If things were in place to make it more smoother, if services were more interlinked and working together, it'd help women.
When services work in silos, they are not able to receive the full picture of a woman's experience. So if we think of it like a jigsaw, if you just have a piece, then it only tells you a small story. But when you put all the pieces together, you get a full picture, and then you're able to provide the most appropriate and most adequate support for that woman.
Women have many ideas which are hidden underneath them, but they believe they will be judged, they will be harassed by it, so they prefer to keep quiet. So if women can be heard, if they can give them the chance, I believe the system will change. We want to be respected.
We want to be heard.
So throughout that film, we definitely took on a trauma-informed practice, and I'm going to talk you through what that means for us. It's a term that does get used a lot, and sometimes people assume it only applies to organisations working in crisis settings, so homelessness, domestic abuse, mental health. But I kind of push back on that because I think it does apply to any time you're asking someone to share something personal or difficult. It does apply, and that goes as well to your staff, your volunteers. You don't know all of their experience, you don't know what they've been through. So I think it is a practice that should be adopted whenever you're working with any contributors. And what does it look like in practice? So it starts before you even get into a room or a Zoom call, or you're making notes on an interview. It means you're really explicit about what the process involves. So you tell people how long it's going to take, who will be in the room during the interview, what kind of questions you're going to ask, whether they can stop at any point, which they should be able to, whether there's anything they don't want to speak about, where they feel most safe to be interviewed. So their conversations feel really small, but they really make a big impact on how safe someone feels when it actually comes to the day when you're interviewing them. It also means thinking about what the contributor will get out of the experience. And I think this is something that the sector doesn't talk about enough. And there's often an assumption that people want to share their story for altruistic reasons or to help others, which is true. And a lot of the times it is. But we also need to think about what the process costs them emotionally and whether we're giving anything back. And that might be something as simple as they want to, do some skill sharing with someone in the team. They're interested in marketing, or it might be that you can give them a voucher for something, like a shopping voucher. So it's important asking that question, like, is there anything that we can do for you to say thank you or to help you through this? And crucially, that the support shouldn't end when the interview ends or the camera stops. If someone has shared something difficult with you, you need to check in with them after, make sure they're okay. It's good practice, it's human decency. We've also worked with charities that let the person know when the case study is being published or the film's being launched beforehand, so they know the date that that's going to happen, and they can chat it through about what they might feel, what they might be going through their mind at that point, how they might be able to access support. So I think it's all about trauma-informed practice is just thinking about, how do I make sure this person feels very safe, in control, and they're not sharing anything that they're not comfortable with. The next thing I want to touch on is consent. So I think it's an area where a lot of organisations are technically compliant, but not necessarily ethical. So getting a form signed is the absolute basic. And for it to be meaningful, the person giving it really needs to really genuinely understand what they're agreeing to. So that means plain language, not lots of jargon, not lots of legal phrasing. If your consent form is 5 pages long, I'd encourage you to try and revisit and reduce that down. They also need to know that they can change their mind at any point. This is something that's not often made explicit enough. So it means that they're told they'll be able to withdraw consent after the interview, after publication, and you need to have processes set up to be able to handle that. And there needs to be someone that they can raise that with easily and that they know about. And then they really need real control over what's shared. So not just a yes or no, but like real choices. Do they get to see the content before it goes out? Can they ask for specific parts to be removed? Can they choose which platforms it appears on? And if you're working with someone who can't give their full consent because of their age or their cognitive capacity, you need to get assent from an appropriate person. But you should also still involve the individual themselves as much as possible. So don't talk about someone in front of them as if they're not there. Like, it needs to be an active conversation. And you can do really budget-friendly versions of all this. You can have a one-page document in plain English, like a really good, robust conversation before anything's signed. You need to make sure that you really believe that that person can give their fully informed consent, and a real actual invitation for people to ask questions, and to give that opportunity throughout as well. So consent should always be an ongoing conversation. I'm going to show you another film now, which is an example of, I know a lot of organizations work with vulnerable people that for whatever reason can't or don't want to be shown on camera. And this is a video that we did with an amazing charity called the Bike Project, who work with refugees. And the person we were filming couldn't have their face on screen, but we worked with that person, Amina, to actually, she decided what part of her body she wanted to be shown. We let her see that on the days. We filmed a bit and let her watch it back. She chose where the shoot was going to take place, and then we made sure that she really understood what the risk was, and obviously made sure that we could confidently say, and the charity would confidently say that she wasn't at risk by being in the film. And we also just talked her through what might happen, with negative comments on social media, and whether she was prepared for that, and offered her support during and throughout. So this is quite a good example of how you can still create content, but without showing anybody's faces, and still get that kind of emotive, ethical feeling from a piece of content.
I came to the UK because it wasn't safe for me to be at home. When I got to London, I was put in a hotel by the Home Office, and they give you a specific document basically saying you shouldn't work until we decide on your case. So people are left in a limbo where you can't work, you can't do much. It was very heavy to see that there were so many people in need all the time. We were given £8 something a week. For me, like, I needed feminine products, for instance, like that £8 was gonna all go to that week. If one day I traveled by bus, more than 80% of my money for the week's gone. You have to get to your appointment, so I walked to a lot of places. But yeah, it made it really hard. For a lot of people, it was very isolating. After a few months of living in a hotel and not necessarily having a lot of control over my life, I ended up feeling really down and depressed. I felt like my life was out of control. I found out about the Bike Project. They teach women how to cycle, so that's how I learned to cycle. I was very excited. It's been a big goal of mine. I've always in my head just thought, like, when I see someone cycling, I'm like, that looks so cool. I think it is important for refugees and asylum seekers to have bikes because it's the quickest way to get around. It's the cheapest way to get around. It helps you mentally. It's the only form of transportation that I use, to be honest. It's been a huge mental benefit. I didn't really have a lot of support system in place. So it was getting both that like physical activity, but also feeling connected to a community. And I think the Bike Project definitely does that. It helps you rebuild your life and kind of take control of it, I would say, yeah.
So now I'm going to talk about some interview techniques to give you some sort of practical tips as well of how you can interview people to get like really good, genuine, authentic answers, but doing it in a way that everyone still feels safe. So yeah, I think this is where some people go a bit wrong, and it's not because they're careless. It's just because you've got a lot to go. You've got a lot going on. I think the most important thing that happens is almost before the interview even starts. So talk to the person beforehand, not like a formal briefing, just a general conversation. Build a bit of trust. Get a feel for how they speak, what they're comfortable with, what they'd rather not go into. I wouldn't share your questions exactly unless they specifically ask for it, just because people then tend to sort of rehearse the answers in their head, and that makes me even more nervous. I usually just talk about, well, these are the things we're going to be covering, and we're going to be talking about things like this. Is there anything you don't want to cover? And that kind of preparation just changed the dynamic on the day, because again, you're reiterating that they are in control of everything. When you're in the interview, like, positioning really matters. It sounds silly, but you kind of, if you're filming or if you're sat down interviewing someone, you need to be at eye level. So don't set up a camera that's sort of looking up or down on someone, because it can create like a power imbalance that the audience probably won't be aware of, but that it can create that feeling. And then you want to ask open-ended questions. So instead of saying things like, did the program help you, which could just be a yes or no question, you want to ask questions like, what has changed for you since you started working with us? So give people room to find their own words, and that you'll get better answers. And also just give space. So if someone is saying something and that, you know, they've just told you something, like, give a little bit of a pause, and people tend to want to fill the silence. And that will just you'll get like better answers, because they kind of go into things in a bit more detail. And I think that if you ask open-ended questions, you're giving people more of the control and power over what it is that they want to talk about and what they don't. So yeah, those are just some little tips. And then yeah, give space. This is really hard, especially if you're nervous or you're conscious of timing. But make sure you give a lot of time for people to be able to just, like, you know, really give them the space that their story deserves, and let them sort of guide the conversation in a way. But obviously, when you are interviewing people and it's something that's emotional, then things can happen. You know, the most important thing is just stay calm. So don't panic. Don't try and move on too quickly. Don't say, please, that, you know, don't say don't cry or you're doing so well. Like, just give them time. Let them know it's okay to have a break, and then make sure you check in with them after. Offer support if needed, and it should, like I said, it should be ongoing. So I just usually let people, if they are getting upset, just say, do you need to take a break, or let's take a break. And just keep asking, are you okay carrying on? Is that a topic you'd rather us not cover again? So yeah, just make sure that there's support there, and also just checking in after as well, that they're okay if it was a particularly emotional interview. And that also counts for the team as well. Like, it can be very emotional for you as someone who's interviewing, or someone who's filming, or even someone who's editing. Just make sure you check in, and that there's support available for people who are working on the project, like at every stage of the process. And then another thing I just want to talk about, because I think this is a real great way, especially for smaller organizations, to actually get more content and do it in an ethical way. And I think that smaller organizations actually have an advantage over bigger ones, because there's less rigid processes, and you actually have, I know when I was working in small charities, I actually knew a lot of the people that were using the services. So you kind of already build that relationship with them. And the idea is kind of simple, that instead of telling people stories for them, you help them tell their own. So you provide the skills, the brief, the support, and then you kind of step back, and that really is co-creation in its fullest sense. So what that might look like in practice is, it means bringing people in from the very beginning, so the concept stage, not just a filming day. It means giving clear guidance, what you're hoping for them to capture, what format works best, what a good version looks like, so sharing examples. Don't just assume people will know. You need to be a little bit explicit about, you know, this is what we're creating this film for, and this is the kind of stuff we'd like you to capture. Here's some examples of that. It means providing feedback, so be honest, constructive, and that will help people, especially if there's something that the people who are creating it with you actually want to learn these skills. So, you know, they should be treated as an equal. And it means coming back full circle as well. So making sure contributors see the finished content, that they're credited appropriately, that they understand that the impact their story has had. And none of this costs more money. It takes more care, definitely, more time, more relationship building, but it does definitely produce better stories. And in my opinion, I think the stuff that's made in this way is just so much more powerful. And I'm going to show you now a video of a project that we worked on with an amazing small charity called Hear Me Out. It was a fully co-created project. So what we did, they work with people with lived experience of immigration detention centres. So we did a in-person session with a group of 4 who wanted to not just share their stories, but be involved in some way. So 2 of the people were happy to be on camera, and the other 2 didn't want to be on camera, but they were happy to shape the messaging, and they were happy to be involved in giving notes on the edit and putting together the brief. So they were just as valued as the people that were being on camera. We then kind of tried to figure out what's the shared story that they wanted to tell. And the thing that came through was that they wanted people to realize that they're more than just a label, they're more than just a number. They are people that have their own experience, that have their own stories. And we then did a session with them on how they can capture their own content using their phones. So that was just tips on framing and sound and lighting. We came up with some questions that they could kind of answer themselves, and then they decided the other stuff they wanted to film, so stuff beyond what was just the interview. We then edited it, but they gave notes. The whole team of them gave notes, and then we launched it, and they were all really happy with it. And it was a really exciting project to work on. So I'm going to show you one of those films that was created by Kwaku.
Sometimes, like, people want to distance themselves away from you, and it makes you feel you don't belong here. You put yourself down inside. You get into conversation with someone very nice, very beautiful. You talk about career, you talk about work, you talk about your visions, your potentials. And the next question is like, wait, all that you're saying, no, what are you doing now? Like, you can't do anything now because you're an asylum seeker. It's kind of like you've been trapped in a space where nothing's working for you. My name is Kwaku, and I'm from Ghana, and I was a 10. I tried my very best to have a positive impact in my society with the youth. When I got out from school, I started up a tailoring business where I gathered some few young people and started teaching them how to sew for free and creating an environment at home where they can feel responsible for themselves and better their lives as time goes on. I really loved what I was doing. In my time of dismay and in my time of despair, I can't do much. But one thing I know that I can do is to give what I have. And that is my sound of music. Hear Me Out saw me more than a label of being an asylum seeker. They gave me a sense of belief. They gave me a sense of hope. And encouraged me to see from the perspective of being a great person someday.
Yeah, also really happy to answer more questions about that project if anyone wants to know anything more specific about it. But it was done, on a very small budget, but with big impact. So how do you do this on a small budget? Ethical storytelling does not require expensive equipment. It doesn't require an external agency. It doesn't require a lot of time. Once you have the processes in place, I understand that that takes time to set that all up. But what it does require is preparation. So you need to think through the process before you start, rather than just improvising as you go. It requires really clear, simple documentation, like a consent form you can actually explain, a brief you've really thought through and thought about all the different touch points of where you might check consent or the trauma-informed practices you're going to bring in. And it requires like a real commitment to the people that you're working with, which costs nothing at all, really. So I think if you want to take something away from this today, it would be, for me, is just slowing everything down at the beginning. We spend way more time in pre-production than a lot of other agencies do because of this. So I think it's having the conversation, explaining the process, it's building the relationship. It saves you time later and gets you much better results, and also reduces the risk of people withdrawing consent later on because you've been really transparent throughout. So it's not working it's not working in a way that feels like there's tension there. It's working in a way that you're really together in it and that you're moving through the process together. Yeah, so it's definitely possible to do. I've done it, and happy again to go through it in a lot more detail if anyone's got specific questions. We have got a bit of time, lots of time now that we can do Q&A. And before we do, I just want to tell you about our community studio, which some of you might already be a member of, but it's a online learning platform teaching you how to spot stories, film content using your phones, and then edit content. There's a module in there about legacy giving as well, which I think, again, is something small charities could be doing a lot more of. There's loads of training. You can do it at your own pace. You get 12 months membership. It's £250. You can share it across your organisation. It's closed at the moment because we kind of open and close it so that people can come in and settle. But it's open again in September, so you can join the waitlist, and I'll send a link to that. So yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully you found that helpful. I know I've sort of whizzed through it a little bit, but I'm gonna stop sharing now and just answer any questions that anyone has. We also have loads of resources as well on our YouTube channel where we go into this in more detail if anyone has any specifics. So yeah, pop your questions in the question box. Someone asked if slides will be shared. I can share the slides. Yeah, I'm just going to share the recording, but I can also share the slides. I'll make a note of that. So someone else has asked, for those of us who find trauma-informed practice to be rather problematic, is there any resources on telling ethical stories in a way that isn't necessarily trauma-informed? I'm not sure about what the Renos Papadopoulos, sorry, I'm butchering that. But maybe if you could just explain that to me a little bit, I should be able to answer that for you. I'll come back to that one. Another question is, our main beneficiaries are people in crisis. Feature examples. It'd be really interested to hear your advice on how approaches to ethical storytelling and trauma-informed practice apply in a context. I think it's kind of what you've said. It's, even if it's not somebody that's kind of been through something in crisis, it's still, no matter who we interview, even if we're doing a project and it's a legacy pledger, who's someone that you wouldn't think would need to have that care. I think if you have that approach with everything, you'll get better results. And as I said, like, you don't, it's almost like embedding that in all your processes, that so that if you were in a situation where you were interviewing someone that it could be triggering the interview in some way. And also, you don't know what people have been through. It might be that even you as an interviewer might be triggered by certain things that are talked about. So I think it's definitely bringing people along for the journey. So taking that time at the beginning to ask them what they want to get out of it, what they think the key message should be, respecting their lived experience, whatever that is, even if it's just someone who's attending a workshop or doing an art session. It's then doing really good informed consent, because it might be that you think that they're fine, but actually once you kind of dig into, how would you feel if someone had put a negative comment on this on social media, making sure they really understand what the risks and the implications are, that they know where exactly it's going to be shared, if there's any risk there for them, how long it's going to be shared for. So your consent form should have a period of time that consent is valid for, and then you might have to go back and update that consent. And then again, just bringing them along. So making sure on the day, even if it's just an interview about a certain part of your service, just say, is there anything that you don't want me to talk about today? It's just being like a nice human for people, I think. And that might look different depending on like what situation that person's in. But hopefully that answers it. I think it's just good practice for everybody to be doing, because you don't know what experiences people have had. Okay, and then someone else has said, a lot of our support we provide is indirect by training people who reach those in most need. So it feels hard to get to the heart of the stories that will move people. I think it's when it's kind of, I would go to interviewing the people that are working with those people, so, and get them to talk about what it means to them and the differences that they've seen in people, because that can be equally just as emotive. It's like when sometimes we work with charities that work with children, you're not going to get a real emotive response from a child saying, this has changed my life, because it's a child. But actually, if you speak to a parent or a support worker who can say, I've seen such a change in this child because of the services, or you know, they come out of a session and they film themselves on the phone saying, I've just come out of a session, and you know, it's amazing. I love doing my job because I just got to see this happen, or like, it's really hard doing my job because I just got to see this happen. So I think you can still get to the emotive stuff without actually having to have the person who's engaging with the services directly. And we've done films like that. So again, if you want to email me, I can send you over some examples. Okay, sorry, I'm just working through these. So do you have any tips for finding participants for these types of stories? I work for a HIV charity, and a lot of our clients aren't happy disclosing their HIV status, so they haven't expressed an interest in participating. Yeah, so what we normally do, I think it's firstly just how you even frame the ask. So what we would do is we would do a call out on, say, social media, or through your newsletter, or even just when you're talking to people, and say, we're creating some content so that we can raise money, or that we can find volunteers, so that this can happen, so that we can support more people who are living with HIV. It's not just saying, can you share your story? It's start with the difference that them sharing their story will have. And then I usually say, we're just doing a bit of research at the moment to help refine our messaging, which is always really helpful anyway, because then it's never bad to kind of try and help refine your messaging. During that conversation, I then ask them about their story, about what they're happy, what they're comfortable sharing with me at that stage, before a camera's on, or before I'm even making a case study. And throughout that, I'll just be telling them about the process and what it might look like, and building rapport and trust, and making sure that they know that they'd be in control of it, that they get to see it before it goes anywhere. Because I think the reason people say no to a lot of stuff is that they just don't know what's actually going to happen, and they think they're not going to have any say in it, and they're worried they might say the wrong thing. But if you reassure them that those things are all going to be happening, then they're more likely to say yes. Then at the end of the conversation, I'd say, would you be willing to share your story on camera to help other people, or would you be willing for me to interview you and we write the case study together? You're more likely to get people to say yes. If it's people that, you know, don't want to, as you said, disclose their HIV status, you could do it anonymously, like we did with the Bite Project film. So you could still film them, but you've just got parts of their body. Or it might be that you have a voiceover, and then we've just done a few films with small charities where it's a voiceover and then it's someone like walking down the streets, you just get in their feet, or it's you know, like filming a landscape and then it changes. So there's ways to be a bit creative, but having someone's voiceover over the top. So I think it's just making sure they know that, like, they don't necessarily have to be on camera. They can, like, they can still make as much of an impact without having to do that. Okay, and then Sam has asked, in the film from the women's charity, the opening shots of someone speaking without them heard perfectly set the theme of women not being listened to. How do you involve the interviewees in choosing creative concepts like that? Did you brainstorm with them? Yeah, we did. So we brainstormed it with them. What we did with that is we showed them loads of examples of existing films, and they chose the style they wanted. So we showed them at the start something that was a bit more conceptual. We showed them one person telling their story, and then we showed them something that was like a mixture of people telling the stories and then some professionals in there. They really liked it, but they also liked an element of one of the conceptual things where it wasn't the silence thing, but it was something similar. And they said they really liked the idea of it kind of, how do we show people that we're not being heard and we just want to be listened to? Because that's the thing they kept saying over and over again in the brainstorming. And then I think it was Nina from the charity came up with the idea, and then we sort of all talked about it together. So it was very much like a collaborative brainstorm, that they definitely had input on that. Okay, and then any further tips on how to manage the difference between priorities of external stakeholders versus people's lived experience? For example, a funder might want to hear how we work with disadvantaged people, but might not necessarily want to label our beneficiaries to talk about themselves or be comfortable being talked about in that way. Yeah, I think the way to do it is that it has to be authentic. And I think that some charities might just find somebody like, oh, we've got a new person, Bob, he's really happy to be on camera. And then it's like, okay, well, what can we film him doing? What can we film him saying? And it's not necessarily right for what actually is needed for that content. So I think the better way to do it is to think about what is it we want to achieve with this content. So for example, with this one, you might want to show how we work with disadvantaged people. Instead of trying to like make someone say something like that, you refine that message and you think about, well, how could we show that in a way that wasn't disrespectful to people living in a way that was disadvantaged to them. How do we show people that without explicitly saying it? And then you try and find people who can bring that to life naturally without doing it in a way that, I mean, your funders shouldn't really be needing it that to be said that explicitly. You'd hope that they would kind of know, they'd be able to know what that looked like in practice, so you can kind of just speak around the topic in a way that was empowering for the people being involved. And I would ask them, in what way do you feel like you might have been disadvantaged, or you might be disadvantaged? And then if they say, you know, I've never had access to a certain service, I'm like, well, how could we show people that? What might that look like? How could we film something that would show people what that looked like for you? So that's kind of how I would do it. I would flip it a little bit, find the people and get them to figure that out with you, and make sure they feel empowered, rather than you kind of trying to like extracting something from them to fit a stakeholder's needs. Sorry, that was a really indirect way to answer that question. Alex has asked, is there an optimal length for a quote to be used in a written fundraising campaign or grant application? I would always just err on, I would be more, you want to use people's actual words, and I would always do something that just captures the emotion of what it is you're trying to portray. So you always just want to get people, with quotes, with video, with stills, you want to get people to feel something so that they then go on to find out more information. So instead of saying something like, I have been using this service every Tuesday and it's great, you want them to say, so you'd want to pull something out of them from there that said something like, it changed my life. And then people want to read more, because the quote should just be kind of a teaser. Okay, and then Oliver's asked, this might be beyond the scope of this session, but do you have any tips for making the most of finished films in terms of distribution, reaching a wider or relevant audience beyond posting to the organization's own social media platforms and websites? So yeah, this is kind of what I used to do when I was working in a small charity is, and I had no budget for any marketing, is I'd make a film using my phone. I would then make sure everyone in the organization knew the day it was going to be launched. So that would be volunteers, trustees, staff, the people we were supporting. I did them a little pack that was like, here's some things. Can you share this film on this day? Here's a quote that you can just copy and paste to go with it, with like the call to action or whatever it is you want people to do. Here's something you could put on WhatsApp to share with your groups that you're in. So everybody was like lined up for it. I'd then contact any other local people, like local businesses, because it's easier to ask them to share something than to ask for money. So could you share this with your intranet? I would just be on a share frenzy, asking people to share it. I'd then post it on local once it was ready to launch. So you're trying to get the algorithms to see, or people like this. So I'd be like, when we share it, please go on, comment on it, like it, share it, because then the algorithms will think that everybody loves it, and hope they do. I would then also share it on local Facebook groups, or if you're a national charity, on groups that you think people might find it interesting. So, you know, maybe on Mumsnet, or like things for sale in Worcestershire, just to get people to watch it and or read it and then come to your site. And then what I did as well before, which does cost a little bit of money, but works, is if you can get a still from either your case study or your film, and print it as a postcard and Vistaprint, doesn't cost a huge amount. You can then put a QR code on that for people to watch it or to read this case study, and put that in other places. So like community centres, cafes. If you've got a list of donors, like sending that in the post always worked really well for me. So yeah, there's things you can do on a minimal budget to make the most of it. The saddest thing is just letting it sit on a YouTube channel. So definitely take a bit of time thinking about how you can make that content more like I guess shareable. So you want to do things like open with a hook, because that means people will stop scrolling. So things like, it saved my life, or I don't know what I'd do without this place, or I can't tell you what it's done for me, or yeah, stuff like that you can have as a hook. And the other thing, which is coming into my head and then it's gone again, don't be afraid to just post it once. Like, post it a few times that week, and then post it again in a month's time. Send it in your email. Do a one dedicated post, just one dedicated email just about that, not with loads of other things in it. Send it to your fundraisers. Yeah, get people to do the sharing for you, I think is great when you've got limited resource. Oh, you've just started doing the QR code thing. Great. Yeah, and even put it up in churches is always good. The other thing as well I always say is, don't be afraid to, like, something I've seen small charities do really well, and I did it, is other forms of content beyond case studies. And I think we've got a recording on our YouTube channel about this, like content beyond case studies. But if you're a local charity, even things like, here's our staff's 5 top restaurants in Oxford, because that's shareable content that's not related just to your cause, so it might get shared wider. And then people will see that you're wearing your branded t-shirt, and they'll think, oh, what's that? Or you say, oh, and while you're here, don't forget to pop in or donate or find out more about us here. Yeah, so do other things as well to try and like broaden your content and your audience. Great. Well, I think that's all the questions, I think. So yeah, 10 minutes back of your lives, everybody, but keep going. Small charities are amazing. You're keeping the whole country going, and I'm always around if you want help with anything. If you want to have a one-to-one chat, I'm always happy to chat to small charities, so please do reach out. And we've got heaps more workshops coming up, that they're always free, so just have a look on our website. But yeah, keep going, and thank you, and happy Small Charities Week.